Anyway, welcome everybody to the 10th birthday party of MCC Reads. When Jamie and I talked about this coming up, we realized it's 10 years, woohoo! And so that seemed like a cause for celebration. I'm going to go over our books from the past because I have some wonderful copies to hand out, but I wanted to introduce you first to our feature read, that's what I'm calling it, and our companion read as well. So people may ask, well, why did you pick two books for the 10th birthday of MCC Reads? And it's kind of because of the stories and the genres, and we'll just go through that as we go along. So let's meet the road first. This is our feature read. So you can see a pretty plain cover. Sometimes you can't judge a book by its cover. This doesn't mean it's a plain story, but you can see how stark the cover is. That kind of already sets the stage for the book. This is the story of man and boy. They are father and son, but they really just refer to them throughout the story as man and boy. A father and son pair who survive an unexplained cataclysmic event. We never know what that event is. So in your own mind, you get to figure that out if you'd like. And what that has done, it has left the world with no plants and virtually no animals as well. If you see an animal, it's probably a wild dog, that kind of thing. So just about everything but people has been wiped out. They live in the northern part of the United States, again not specified where, and they're traveling south. And the reason they're headed south is that the man has determined that winter will soon be upon them, and if they head south, there's a chance they won't freeze. He's also heading south because where he is north, he knows nothing good is happening there. So there's this hope inside the man that as he travels with the boy, they will find either some redeeming location or person to connect with. But the only thing he knows for sure is that the road, and again here the road stands for a lot of different things. The road will be dangerous, the road will be deadly dangerous. So when you think about the road, you can think in your mind maybe your own difficult struggles in life. This is their story of survival. This book is hard to read. And we haven't done something that is so hard to read before. And I say hard to read not because of the vocabulary, but because of the genre and what happens in it. Things can be hard to read, things can be brutal, and things can still be beautiful. This is an amazing story of the relationship between the father and the son. It's an amazing story of a human's will to survive. It is an amazing story of what connects us and what pulls us apart. And it is a somewhat beautiful story, and I say somewhat, of humanity. I mean, why do we choose to survive? Why do we help some people? And why do we also turn against our fellow man? This is outstanding. It was written in 2006, and in 2007, it won the Pulitzer Award. Most of his books, McCarthy's books, have a kind of a Western setting. They'd be called a more modern kind of Western. If you know All the Pretty Horses, maybe you've read that series or you've watched the movie. There is drama and adventure and just a lot of good things, but always in the West. This is way outside of anything he's ever written before. Because this book is set after whatever this cataclysmic event is, it is considered post-apocalyptic fiction. Okay? So the other book that we're doing is called Life as We Knew It. You can see the moon here, see how big it is, and see the little house here. The reason we did two books is because not everybody has read dystopian, apocalyptic, or post-apocalyptic fiction. And if you haven't delved into that before, The Road comes as kind of a wake-up call to you. I would recommend it to everybody, but if you haven't read that kind of thing before, you may want to start with this. This is an outstanding young adult novel, but like most young adult novels that are good and of quality, they're written for adults too. Adults can really enjoy them. This is the story. It's told in journal format by a teenage girl. This is the story of, so this would be apocalyptic and then post-apocalyptic. This starts with, the people know that the moon is coming out of orbit. And actually, it's coming closer to Earth. So people are concerned. But what then happens, what usually happens with our concerns, we have the worriers, and then we have how we forget about things. And in the forgetting about it, we start to celebrate it. So schools all over the globe start studying the moon and it being out of order. And let's write science project papers on it. And let's do this and that. And people decide they want to get married on the date that it goes out of orbit. And there are watch parties. People want to sit out in their sleeping bags and camp and watch the moon come closer to the Earth. Well, what do you think will happen when the moon comes closer to the Earth? It changes the gravitational pull. So actually, the moon goes out of orbit, and I'm not giving anything away because this happens in the first few pages. It comes out of orbit, and everything goes wrong. First of all, gravitational pull changes, which affects climate change immediately. Immediately. It changes the way that animals behave. It changes the way that people behave. Of course, it takes down all technology globally. So, okay, now we no longer can communicate with each other. We can't heat our homes like we think we should. There's no way to get gas to the gas station in order to fill up your car. And how do we even get basic necessities like groceries, that kind of thing? So this book is definitely a story of survival, but told by this teen girl. She is with her family, and she lives, I believe, in the Pennsylvania area. So it has very much a Midwest setting that readers here could certainly relate to. She lives with her small family, kind of in a rural spot, and she knows her neighbors, and everybody is seeking to survive, but at the same time, again, they're forming relationships. Who is it? Jim and I were talking about, who is it that determines that they want to survive? Who has that will? And not only the will, but do you have the skills? I have the will to survive. I can't start a fire without matches. So where does that leave me? So all of these things are experienced, and she talks about them. When I read this book the very first time, this may be a weird link, but I thought all in my mind about the Diary of Anne Frank. Because here was another, this is fiction, but here was a girl, in that case telling a true story, telling it in journal, diary form, talking about her family, wanting to survive, the people she lives with, which is like this girl in her neighborhood, and to what ends do they go to make it to the next day. So, if you haven't read dystopian, apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic fiction before, you may want to start with that one. But definitely this one as you come to it. This is actually a set of 4 books. The 3 other books in the series are the same event, but told at different locations. So, one of them has a very urban setting, different places in the world, people speaking different languages, so definitely a set to look at. This one is definitely a standalone book, one of a kind. So, I have copies of these books. I have a little stack over here. Would anybody like a copy of The Road? You have to lift your hand right up high, and Sonia's going to come around. I'll take a couple. The road. Okay. I do have these copies here, so if you change your mind or you know somebody who would like to read one, grab that.
How many want this one?
Would anybody like a copy of Life as We Knew It? All right. There we go. There we go. This is a librarian's favorite thing. Yeah. This pleases me so much. Anybody else? In the back? All right. Do you need one more? Or you need? Yep. Okay. So, as the librarian, I have to give you a little lesson, because of course this is college, and I'm going to explain to you a little bit about dystopian fiction, apocalyptic fiction, and post-apocalyptic fiction. So, dystopian fiction is fiction where we recognize a world or a state or a place, and there are rules that govern it, but maybe we don't really live in that world, is the best way I can describe it. It's often a cautionary tale, so maybe there's a bit of climate change that's happened, and this is why we should be more sensitive about climate, or maybe there's some kind of governmental overreach, and we're dealing with that. It could be about an ism, it could be about racism, sexism, ageism, where that is really magnified, and that's the problem with that. Some familiar examples for that of dystopian are like The Handmaid's Tale, if you've read it or you've seen it. The Giver, you may have read that in elementary school, or maybe your kids read it. The Hunger Games, if you're familiar with that series, or the Maze Runner series, or the Divergent series, those would all be example. Going back a ways, 1984 is an example of dystopian fiction, and also The Clockwork Orange. So that gives you an idea of dystopian fiction. Apocalyptic fiction is where you experience the bad event. So the world is kind of burning down around you, and we read the story of the actual disaster, and people move forward. So that is oftentimes the result of a nuclear war or an accident. Again, it can be a climate thing. I was talking with Jim earlier because we kind of had different thoughts about maybe what caused the beginning of the road. So the thing that I don't worry about nuclear war, first of all, because I don't control it, but I sometimes think about supervolcanoes. So in Yellowstone is actually a supervolcano. And so that would be an example of a natural or climatic change. If Yellowstone were to blow, a huge ash cloud, which is basically everything, the volcano and all the ground that surrounds it, would go into the atmosphere, blanket the atmosphere, and you know how the world spins and the air moves, we would soon not have any sunlight. So what does that do? That causes plants to die, animals to die, humans to die. As soon as that's in the atmosphere and changes all of that, that also would wipe out the grid. So our ability to communicate again and be able to get resources, that's wiped out. So that would be an example, and that would just be globally. That's an example of a climate thing. So examples of apocalyptic fiction would be The Dog Stars. That's by Pete Heller. I don't know if anybody's ever read him. I love him. He writes a great kind of adventure, usually with a male character. That's an example of The Last Policeman series. That's a story of a policeman. They know the world is going to end in so many days, and so people are kind of going cuckoo, but he's still reporting to work. He's like one of the few. That's a fascinating series. Or did you see the movie Interstellar? If you watch that movie with Matthew McConaughey, that's kind of an apocalyptic story. So post-apocalyptic fiction is when the disaster is already happening and we're living through it. That's why The Road falls into that category. So books that would fit that, not only The Road, but if you've read Bird Box or its sequel, or if you saw the Bird Box movie, that's a good example of that. If you saw the movie Book of Eli, that's somewhat similar to The Road. That would be a movie that also matches that. I don't know when it was out, but it's been a while because it's in paperback. There was a book called 1 Second After, and it's about when there's an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse that wipes out the grid. So the air is fine, but everything else goes haywire. So our modern life just kind of comes down. That would be post-apocalyptic. So I'm frequently asked, why don't these books fall into fantasy or science fiction? Why do we have these particular genres? And that's really easy for me to answer, because when librarians think about fantasy, and somebody says, oh, is this a fantasy book? The fast librarian answer is there a wizard? Is there a troll? Is Harry Potter in it? Any of those things. If the answer to that, magic people are there, then it is definitely a fantasy story. Or we say, someone will say, well, does this fit in apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, dystopian? I'll say, well, is there a lightsaber? Is there a spaceship? Is there intergalactic travel? That's science fiction. Otherwise, it's possibly dystopian. So I'm going to say something else. People say to me, oh, you know, why the doom and gloom book? You must like doom and gloom. That's not it at all. But it is fascinating. These are things we can think about and imagine in our own mind and explore without actually living through them. So who reads this kind of book? Look, Sonia reads this kind of book. My dear Sonia. So no judgment on that, because we all read those kind of books. And what she's holding up are the other books in the Life as We Knew It set. So these are the post-apocalyptic stories. Who else reads these kind of books? Lisa, who works here. And she has in her hand First Light. First Light is interesting because it's written for like a 6th, 7th grade audience, and this one fits, this is a little science fiction, but also dystopian. This is the story of a young boy who is traveling to Greenland with his science parents, and they're looking at the permafrost in Greenland. And while he's there, actually there's a young girl named Thea who is living with her family and generations of people under the ground, under the permafrost in Greenland. Centuries ago, they were thought to be witches, so they went into hiding and built this whole subterranean whatever. This is a wonderful book written for kids. So that's First Light. Who else reads this? Well, Raylyn, who's at the front desk. Here we go again with dystopian, and what you see here are 2 books out of the Hunger Games series. Excellent books. Who else reads it? Well, Jennifer Veronica does. Margaret Atwood, which people sometimes think of her for her short story work, a lot of different things. She actually writes dystopian, and she has a great series that Jen loves, and you can see she's reading one of her favorite books, The Handmaid's Tale. So, and is there anybody else who reads this kind of book? Me! And this is one of my favorite in this genre, and this is apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic. This is When the English Fall. The reason this book is so fascinating is because it's told from the perspective of an Amish man. So again, kind of a rural Pennsylvania setting. He is part of a huge Pennsylvania Dutch community, and they're going about their business as usual. Some bad thing has happened in the world and kind of wiped out the grid. So people in the cities are starting to fall apart. And when they're falling apart, people get on the move. And where do they move? They start walking through the countryside and eventually come to the Amish. And what do the Amish have that the English, well, Amish people refer to us as, what do they have? Well, they have food, and they have fresh water, and they have housing. They have everything they desire. So this actually sets up a conflict between the Amish and the English. Any of that I just talked about? It's so fun to give a little library lesson and talk about those books. And the whole reason for the birthday party is because we're celebrating this 10 years of books. And I have some more books to give away. So we got started with MCC Reads with The Art of Racing in the Rain. This is your 30-second clip notes on these books. The Art of Racing in the Rain was fun to do because the narrator is a dog. So, do you know that? This is this beautiful dog right there. And he lives in a family with a husband and a wife, and the woman is going to be expecting a child. And the dog knows something is wrong with the woman. But the dog cannot communicate that, but he knows something is wrong with the woman. And I'm not giving anything away because this happens early on. It turns out that he can smell cancer. And so this is just a very powerful story of a family who's suffering a medical tragedy, a baby being born, told by the dog. So for real, you know, if you have pets in the house, they see it all. And if they could talk, this would be their story. This book is absolutely outstanding. They did make a film of it that was but good try. Yeah. Would anybody like a copy of this wonderful book? It looks like Sonia has 3 copies. So, yeah, I see Mike in the back. All right. And I do have just a limited amount of copies, but I do have the book on the shelf here, so if you decide you want to read it, you can also check it out. The next book we did, that was fiction, of course. The next book we did was The Other Less More, and One Name, Two Fates. This is nonfiction, and this is actually the story of two boys who become young men, who become grown-ups, named Wes Moore. And I believe this has a Philadelphia setting. I think it's
Baltimore.
Baltimore, okay.
And Westmore is now the governor of Maryland, I believe it's the governor. He's a governor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Isn't that awesome? So 2 boys who become young men and men, the exact same name, and I think they live like just blocks apart in Baltimore. And their lives, well, both Westmores are kind of bumpy in the beginning through parenting, through what the school does, and just through how the inner resources of these, their lives while starting together begin to diverge. So this is an interesting look at community, in particular Black, poverty, urban community, and how we treat people there. And also the importance of involved parenting, involvement in other social groups, and what a difference it can make. This is outstanding. That's kind of a boring description for such a fascinating book, but would anybody like a copy of The Other Wes Moore? All right. And guess who wants a copy? Wes. Very, very good.
We got 2 more. Anybody else want it?
Right there is Michelle. All right. The next one we did is The Soloist. This was a real favorite of mine. I loved all these books. This one just kind of sticks out in my mind to me, and we have a lot of copies. And part of the reason is because I actually like the movie version of this one as well. The Soloist, A Lost Dream, An Unlikely Friendship, and the Redemptive Power of Music. This is nonfiction. It's written by a journalist from a California newspaper who sees a man, a homeless man, who is exhibiting some behaviors, atypical behaviors, on his way into work on the side of the road. And so he eventually stops, they kind of converse, but a relationship starts to form. Wow, what a powerful story of friendship. What he discovers is this homeless man is actually a musical prodigy. This is all true. And so he follows this man as they become friends, not only through music, but they also look at drug abuse, they look at why people have home instability, and again, the social network that surrounds them or doesn't surround them. This book is also hilarious, and if I remember correctly, the movie is Jamie Foxx, and is it Robert Downey Jr. too? Yep, so I mean, 2 big names. That movie I would recommend. So, The Soloist. Would anybody like? It turns funny, it turns serious. Anybody interested? There you go. All right. And these are your books to keep. When I do MCC Reads, I buy a ton of used books so I can just hand them out, and you don't need to worry about getting them back. The next one we did was The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. I'm going to ask Jamie to say just a 30-second, do you mind?
Wow.
Because I know she loves it.
Yeah, it's one of my most favorite memoirs. Jeanette Walls, the very first chapter, she's in New York City getting into a taxi cab, and she sees this homeless woman who you then find out, despite how well-dressed and well-to-do Jeanette Walls is, this homeless woman is her mother that she sees rooting through the trash. And that begins her telling the story of her childhood, which was just really interesting. I mean, her parents were very free spirits, but they were also pretty neglectful as well. And, you know, you learn what happens to them and Jeanette as well to put her in that taxi cab in that moment. So
Yeah. It's an excellent book, and again, it turns heartbreaking, but also really funny, too. I mean,
There's some hilarious
Yeah.
parts, heartbreaking parts.
Yeah,
Oh,
heartbreaking
it's-
and funny. Would anybody like a copy of The Glass Castle? And this also became a movie that I was not a fan
I
of,
wasn't,
so
I
wasn't
Woody
even.
Harrelson. had said
Yeah,
so, I mean,
and
but-
so if you watch the movie and maybe you didn't like it, the book is tremendous, so don't let the movie turn it off. Okay, the next one we have, this is funny too. The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. And this is the story of a young Native American boy who then becomes a young adult, so younger and then into those teen years. This is fiction, who because of a particular skill, gets an opportunity to go off the res and go to a white school with all the good athletic things and all the beautiful girls and all the great lunches in the lunchroom. And do you think he fits in? No. Do you think people are kind to him? Only for his skill. Otherwise, they treat him like a stereotype. This book, Sherman Alexie said he pulled on some of his own experiences. It's somewhat his story, but also the story of a lot of other Native Americans that he grew up with because he is Native. And I'm going to take that for just a second. You can see it was a National Book Award winner. It was before, I believe, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, but it does have that feel because these are the pictures that the Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian drew to illustrate his book. So the character has drawn these images. This is such a powerful read. You know, again, it's another one where you can't believe how we behave to people who are not like us, and at the same time, the grace and humor that he exhibits to explain the bad behavior and sometimes do something about it. This is just really wonderful. If you're looking for a book that kind of speaks to reservation life and young people,
My 17-year-old son, who's really a non-reader for the most part, he doesn't love to read, is reading this right now and said, "Mom, this is really great." And I was like, yes.
yeah, it is a young adult book written for like upper elementary, middle school age. The next one we did is The Book Thief. Again, a movie was made about this one. The movie is pretty good. I happened to see it in a movie theater where the power wasn't working in the middle of the winter, so I froze to death. So I was feeling like I was in the story, but also uncomfortable. So anyway, I had to stream it and rewatch it to really enjoy it. The Book Thief is fiction. I talked about the dog as the narrator of the very first book. The narrator of this book is deaf. So again, a very different perspective to tell the story. And what death is doing, this is Holocaust literature, so it's fiction, but again pulls on some stories that we know happen. What death is doing is stalking the next person to die. But as you read this and you think of death stalking these characters, and in particular a young girl and like a teenage, early adulthood male, you have to wonder if death is really stalking. Death loves these people, but also is death. This is a hard one to explain, except that I received this book for Christmas when it first came out from my godmother, who was my #1 reading guru, and it took me 5 times before I could read it. Not the subject matter, I just couldn't get over in the first few pages what death was saying to me. The 5th time I read it, and then I read it 3 times in a row. So this is, if you are interested in Holocaust literature, this is outstanding. It won a bunch of awards for young adults. Is anybody interested in The Book Thief? There we go, right there. Awesome. The next one we did, I only have 1 copy of. This is nonfiction, and it's on writing a memoir of the craft by Stephen King. So it doesn't look like your typical Stephen King book, does it? There's no zombie on the front or somebody with a hacksaw doing whatever or a slathering dog. But this is really written in 2 halves. So the first half is how Stephen King became a successful writer. So you meet Stephen King as a young boy who liked horror magazines, all that kind of early sensationalized pulp fiction, not like the movie, but fiction that was pulp fiction, it's its own genre. And you learn about the influence his mother had on his writing, his somewhat dysfunctional upbringing and family. You find out that he was writing his early works, I think Carrie and Cujo were at the very beginning, on a dryer in the laundry room. So can you imagine Stephen King, you know, and then his love of a typewriter. So you read this whole little biography, memoir, I guess you'd say, autobiography on Stephen King. Fascinating. The other half of it is actually about being a writer. The chops you need, some of the skills to be a successful writer. If you look inside, he's even done, I probably can't flip to it, but like editing marks, just anything that you would somewhat learn in an English class about creative writing. So if you're looking, if you want to be a writer or want to tell your story someday, this is an outstanding one. I have one copy. Is anybody interested in the Stephen King book? Very good, very good. The next one we did was our COVID book. I needed a book that we could do over online, basically, and it's Reading with Patrick, a teacher, a student, and a life-changing friendship. This is the story of a teacher, a brand new teacher, who kind of from an upscale family. Her parents think she's going to be an attorney. She thinks she's going to go to law school, all this stuff, but she becomes a teacher. Horrors to her family. And then a greater disappointment is that she wants to work with underprivileged students and not where she lives. So she moves and goes to work with children who live in poverty in a somewhat broken school system. And she learns more about life in that year than she says in her years beyond. And she has a classroom, and in that class she meets a student named Patrick, who has been held back several years, and he can't read. And Patrick is now like an adult in maybe a 9th grade class, something like that. And she gets to know him, gets to know the family situation, the living situation he has, and along the way she's teaching him to read. So this sounds like a feel-good story, and it is, but it is a real-world story because Patrick doesn't make all the choices that we hope he does under the influence of this person. And he makes these great strides, but still he ends up in jail and in prison, and the relationship fractures, but they come back together, so she starts to visit him where he's incarcerated, and they continue on. This is a powerful book. This one is kind of hard to read, but not again in vocabulary, but it's just, this is life. So would anybody be interested in reading with Patrick? Yeah, very good. Okay. Ooh, the next one is one of my all-time favorites. I love this one. It's Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. So after that, we needed to do something else. So this is fiction. I adore this book. This looks at slavery as it is, as an ultimate evil. And who was around during slavery? Abraham Lincoln. And in it, slavery, because it's so evil, could only come from a really evil place, and that is from vampires. It's from the underworld, the dark world, all of the evil. And it's kind of hard to explain, except that Abraham Lincoln is hunting vampires because he knows to bring an end to slavery, you have to kill the vampires, or at least the head vampire. But he doesn't do it on his own because the slaves are in revolt, and the slaves have figured this out too. So he has other vampire hunters, and this is so corny but wonderful, they go between the North and the South, rooting out this evil. It does look at slavery in a very interesting way from a historical perspective, but also from the great evil that it is. And it isn't that Abraham Lincoln comes in and saves everybody. He's one of the people. But the slaves are saving themselves. It's not the great savior. It's that it takes this collective group and that everybody is capable of creating a better world and wiping out evil. If you haven't seen the movie, this is a movie book that I would recommend as well. I love this movie. So, Abe Lincoln, he's buff, he's swinging. He is great. I don't know who the actor was, but I was like, yeah. So is anybody interested in that? Okay.
You got to show the backside of the
Yes.
book too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so,
Just sticks and
you see the back? There you go. There you go. Do you want hardcover? Yeah. There you go. Anybody else? Lisa? Yeah, the hardcover is that back photo. And so the last one I have to talk about, and I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot again too, if you don't mind, is the one that we did last year, and I know the English department picked it up as well. And I'm just going to say real quick, John Green, you may know him from The Fault in Our Stars, Looking for Alaska, Paper Towns, either the books or you've seen the movies. So if you don't mind giving us a little...
Yeah, so John Green started a podcast called The Anthropocene Review, and a lot of this was written during the pandemic as well. And so he'd have these individual episodes where he's reviewing some aspect of human life, human experience. I mean, it goes everywhere from Diet Dr. Pepper to sunsets to, I mean,
Scratch and sniff.
Scratch and sniff. I mean, it just goes all
Yep.
over the place. And but it's interesting because each chapter is its own review, and he does give a starred review at the end. But it's not really just about that. You know, like the chapter about sunsets is really about vulnerability. You know, and it's just classic John Green, beautiful writing and storytelling. And he just draws from, I mean, it's nonfiction. I mean, we're getting a little bit of literature, a little bit of history, a little bit of science, a whole bunch of storytelling, and it's just beautiful. And I love books that you can read in chunks like that.
Yes,
as well.
they're essays, so you can read 5 pages and feel like you,
Yeah.
beginning, middle, end, and you have a feeling of what's going on.
And the audiobook is great because he reads it, and so, you know, I mean, you can get a lot of this
Yeah.
from the podcast too, but, yeah.
Would anybody like a copy of this? Okay. Let's see. There you go. And Stuart. There you go.
Grab as many as you want.
I have one more. Does anybody else want one? Okay. So that gives you a review of that. I have just a couple more things to share with you. I'm so glad you took my books. That's a wonderful thing. This is 10 years of MCC Reads. So sometimes people say to us, oh, must be fun to work in the library and read and stamp books. Gosh, I want that job. This is what it takes to do MCC Reads. And I have people like Sonia to thank for it. I have people like Amy Troop to thank for it. I have people like Raylan, who just joined us this year, to thank for it. I have people like Lisa Johnson, who work here to thank for it. And I have people like Jamie Hopkins and Chad Walden, who always supported this.